Welcome back, class. Students, today the lesson is all about how do we identify different tree species. We're going to be looking at specific tree species that are native to southeastern United States. We're also going to be looking at common tree species that may not be native but are used regularly in landscapes in this part of North Carolina. There's three main things that you need to look at and learn if you're trying to identify common tree species. The first is the obvious, the leaves. How big are the leaves? What color are they? Different seasons of the year. What is the shape? What is the margin, which is the edge of the leaf? Is it smooth or is it serrated like a knife? What do you do if it's in December and there's not a whole lot of leaves on the trees? Then what do you look at? Well, certain tree species have very specific bark patterns if you look at the bark, or a certain color, or certain thickness. Some of them have a certain smell. And then the third thing is do a little detective work, and depending again on the season, it might be that the fruit is on the tree, or it might be have fallen and it's on the ground somewhere. So you just kind of kick around and look and see what you can come up with. Obviously, if it's an apple tree, you're going to be able to see an apple. But what do? It might be a pecan tree or a black walnut or a pine tree. So you might find, that's right, pine cones would be the fruit. So when you look at those things, there are also hints and clues as to what tree you might be hanging around. We're going to go around my property here and we're going to look at some of the trees, and I'm going to talk about them and show you ways that you can kind of at least divide out. Maybe it's in the oak family, maybe it's in the maple family, and some tricks of the trade. And then I'm going to ask you to go out to your own property or go in your neighborhood or looking, your neighbor's yard. We are allowed to go on nature hikes right now, so maybe go to a park and see if you can come up and find some of these common tree species to the southeastern United States. So this is not a very large tree. This is a smaller tree. It is native to eastern United States, southeastern United States. This one I planted because I really liked what it looked like in the springtime. Not for very long, but right before these pretty heart-shaped leaves, which by the way, the scientific name that you would use, especially if you're in a horticulture class or something, is cordate. Now, they're not fully mature because they really just came on the tree. They'll get more heart-shaped as they get larger. But these cordate leaves come on right after this beautiful, hence the name, red buds. This purpley, the whole tree is covered in this really bright purple very first thing in the spring before the leaves come on. This is not a tree that you would use for timber. You're not going to be able to make lumber out of it. You're not going to be able to make pulpwood, which, by the way, pulpwood is what you would use to make like paper products. It's more of an ornamental tree, but it's a really pretty one. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things in this segment. You can see a little small, let's find my finger, right here. This is a very small sweet gum tree. And then up there, this big guy, okay, I'm going to give you a hint real quick. What did I tell you is the third thing? You look for fruit. So if I look down here, it's a pretty big tree. I come up with the top off of a acorn. And we know that acorns are the fruit off of a oak tree. So there's quite a few on the ground. See right there? So somewhere in this close proximity, there has to be an oak tree. Now, I can tell you that that is an oak tree, but what kind is it? Well, there's dozens and dozens of different kinds of oak trees. So we'll look at that a little bit closer, but at least we got to the family. Let's go back to this little guy. So I'm trying not to get too close because I'm not so sure there's not poison ivy in there. But this one is a sweet gum, and it is very common because it is star-shaped leaves. Yeah, I can get a little closer. And these, again, we're just now getting leaves on the tree. Well, I missed that one. Here we go. That is a classic sweet gum, star-shaped leaves. And another way you can always tell a sweet gum, they grow very, very fast. But this one's not mature enough to have it. They don't get fruit on them until they're mature. But we'll see if we can find another one. They're called sweet gum because they have a gum ball. You've probably seen them in your yard. If you were barefoot, you probably stepped on one and it hurt. Inside of those sweet gums are where the seeds are. And when they dry out, they're actually little balls when they're not fully mature. And then in the fall, they dry out, they fall off the tree, and out fall the little seeds. So this is another look at the sweet gum. Again, they're still young and they haven't fully developed into their full size. But you can see that star-shaped pattern again. And this is a much larger sweet gum than the little guy I showed you earlier. And if you look down here at the ground, you see those gum balls that I was talking about. Oh, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I've seen those, right? So these guys actually are green and they're closed up. They don't look so scary when they're growing on the tree. And then, just like pine cones do, they open up and dry out. And then inside each one of those holes, one of the little seeds falls out. So there's a lot of seeds in one. And then they do their job, because then they fall and they turn into these little guys. And there's a new sweet gum, and there's one that got seeded and is growing. So this is the smallest tree I have on my property right now. I just planted it this year. And if you look on it, it is a cherry tree. Now this is one of the flowering cherries. This is more of an ornamental, and it's not native to here. It's actually native to Japan. But look at that leaf margin. Do you see how it's serrated like a knife? Now it doesn't hurt you, but most of the cherry trees have that serrated edge. Now there's quite a few other tree species that have serrated edge, but at least again, that's a hint for how you would narrow it down. So this is another tree in my yard, and I just pulled this one down because in the springtime is when they're setting their flowers. And those are actually, would become eventually the fruit of this tree. And you say, well, I've never seen those before. Well, this is a river birch, and you may not be familiar with the fruit, but what is something that's very obvious on a river birch? I'm gonna show you that in a second. Yeah, I can zoom in. One thing that's real obvious on a river birch leaf, if you can't see the other telltale sign, is to look at the leaf margin. It always has one big tooth, two little teeth, one big tooth, two little teeth, one big tooth, two little teeth on the leaf margin. Okay, well, you can't see that in January or December. Well, just look at this bark. It is one of the easiest barks to identify because it just peels off. And that's totally normal and common for it. The other thing is, if you'll look, this is one tree that has multi-stems. This one happens to have five stems coming off from the base, major trunks. And it's a multi-stem tree, and it's very, very common for that to be the case for river birches. They grow very quickly. They are most definitely native to southeastern United States, and they love to be near water. So this is one of my absolute favorite trees on the farm, and I'm trying to step back and just show you just how big it is. Right there in the middle is basically like a two-story tree house, so you can imagine how tall and how old this tree is. These southern magnolias are native to southeastern United States, but they are evergreens. Well, what does that mean if they're an evergreen? An evergreen means they never really lose their leaves fully. Now, they do like a 3-year rotation, and they do eventually lose their leaves and grow new ones back, but not all at one time like deciduous trees do. And I want to so you can see there's litter up underneath there. But these take a long time to grow. They grow very large. They can get anywhere from 80 to over 100 feet tall. But right here in the middle, right now, they're setting these very large flower buds, and they will bloom or bust open, and they will be white, and they'll smell really good too. Now, in the fall, if I look down here on the ground, remember I told you to look for fruit, this is the ending result. This comes out of the middle of the flower, so that can tell you how big these flowers are. They're huge. They can be like almost a foot across. And the seed, which they're all gone out of here, it would dry out, and there would be bright red seeds that fall out of the middle of this. And that, again, if no other reason, it's very distinctive southern magnolia, native to southeastern United States, grows huge, takes a long time, beautiful in a landscape if you got the space to have one. There are smaller hybrid varieties that nurseries are growing. If you still want to have a pretty magnolia, but you don't have the space, it takes long term. So we are a week away from Easter, and even if I hadn't looked at a calendar in months, I could tell you that just by looking at this tree. So we're at the end of the dogwood flowering season, but luckily I'm going to show you this one's still got some leaves on it. This is not, I think a lot of times students that don't understand or haven't had a lot of experience with identifying species of trees, they would get this one and maybe a Bradford pear confused. This flowering dogwood does not smell bad, but what you may say, if you say, I have a white flowering tree in my front yard and it smells terrible when it blooms, well, that's a Bradford pear, and they're real common in landscapes. They're not native to here. They're actually not a good landscaping tree in my opinion, because after they get so old, they have weak crotches. A crotch is like this area where a branch comes, and then all it takes is a bad snowstorm and half your tree is gone. But dogwoods are native to here. The nickname is the friendship tree. And what you'll see, these are actually not technically flowers. Scientifically, they're bracts, spelled B-R-A-C-T-S. They're modified leaves. If you look at them, the petal is really real similar to what the leaf looks like too. But in the center, again, it's flowering season and we're pollinating, and that would be the actual flower. That in the middle, not the white part. And if they all get pollinated, then in the fall, that is where you'll find the red berries. So not only is it's not really good to be used for, it never grows straight enough to be able to be used for furniture, but it is able to be used as a beautiful landscape tree. It's called the friendship tree because it does like a little bit of shade, and you usually see it growing wild just along the edges under the canopy of larger growing trees. Now, walking up to this one, this is also a dogwood, and you can see remnants of the very last petals that are left. And as the petals kind of, if I can get it to focus, it's not going to focus on that one. Here we go. You can see there, that was where the bracts, the white, what you call the flower petals, fell off, and that's left in the middle, and that's what will become the red berries. But you can see what the leaves look like. So they have, if you look at the venation means what you see there are the veins running through there's a center vein, and then there's the pinnate that comes off of that is the venation on this. But they are smooth-edged leaves, and to give you an indication of the size, you can see if I put it in the palm of my hand about what size it is. So again, this is a flowering dogwood tree. So this is also a dogwood tree. The difference is this is not a native variety. This is one that horticulturalists and nurseries have did plant genetics and bred and kind of manipulated the genes of the dogwood tree to give one and to find one that is pink in color. And so they sell these. You can buy them at Lowe's, Home Depot, any landscape nursery company, and plant them in your yard, and they just give you a different show of color, and they bloom just a tad later than the native all-white Cornus florida, which is the scientific name for flowering dogwood. So we went over a lot of the common trees that you would find in your landscape, or if you're walking through a forest in this part of the United States. But I have not showed you one family of trees that there's quite a few around, and that would be the one behind me. Let's see if anyone can guess. It's a maple. Now you might have seen that because you think of the maple leaf for Canada, right? Well, we are not in Canada. We're much more south. Let me show you one that's very common here. Let me get a close-up of the leaves. You can see that they are, well, let me get one in my hand. They're the classic maple shape that you might have seen on like a Canadian flag. The difference on this one is you see this part that is the stem that attaches it to the branch on the tree. This is called a petiole. That's the horticulture scientific name. And because that petiole has a reddish tint, it's red in color, that is your tip that you know this is a red maple, which is very common and native in this part of the United States. Now, if I didn't have the leaves on the tree, let's look at the fruit. You look at the ground, we get close. Again, you can see that there is some litter on the ground, and this is the flower of the maple. And you can see right there, maybe not, that right there is the seed of the maple. So this is the very end down there is the actual seed, and it's encapsulated into this kind of wing. So the wind catches it and it flutters. You've seen these, some people call them helicopters, and they float in the air, and that's how they would actually spread at the end of the season. Now, this is a red maple. This would, you might have heard of like maple syrup, and that comes from the sugar maple, which actually doesn't really grow around here very well. That's more of a northeastern United States. Think like New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, up closer to Canada. that of course is where they would grow. But this is your red maple, and you most definitely would find it if you walked through a forest in this part of North Carolina. This is also in the maple family. This is not native to our part of the United States. This is a Japanese maple. I guess you can guess what part of the world it comes from. They grow very slow. They're very expensive as landscape ornamentals, but because they do grow slow and they do have very distinct, beautiful patterns and beautiful leaf shapes and colors, this is one of the more expensive ones. It's more elaborate, very serrated leaf shape, and it stays this color year round. But this is one of the Japanese maples. So this is also a Japanese maple that's used in landscaping. There you can even see the seeds growing on here. And this one is also red, but you can see that it is not the exact shape. The lobes are not as lace leaf as they call the other one I was just showing you. This is a landscaping tree that's very common. We actually have them up the line of our high school. This is just a much older variety. It's kind of been left to be wild and do its own thing. This is a crepe myrtle, and you can see all of this down here. These are all what we call suckers, and they are coming up from the base of the tree and basically sucking the nutrients. They need to be pruned away. If you see that in your yard, you should prune those away, because they're taking the nutrients instead of giving it up into the canopy. Crepe myrtles tend to have a really pretty bark. I don't know if I can get, yeah, there we go. It's just a smooth, beautiful bark. Sometimes the older varieties have this twisted look to it. Well, how do you know if you have a crepe myrtle? They don't get very large at all, especially if someone that you know does what I call crepe murder to them and cuts them back every year. That's a no-no. But you can see it has this leftover where the flowers were on it from last season, as kind of left on the tree, and so a lot of times that is your tip and your hint. Oh, I've got a crepe myrtle. And they bloom in the summertime on into the beginning of the school year, so around August, and that's why they're used a whole lot on school campuses, because they're easy maintenance. They provide color right when we're going back to school. This right here is a water oak. They're real popular. They have smaller leaves, and they're not super lobed like some of the other oaks in the oak family. The scientific name for oak is quercus. So if you look at the scientific names, anything that has quercus as the first part of its scientific name tells you it's in the oak family. And again, we look down here on the ground, and I've got the top to an acorn, which tells me that somewhere in this close vicinity there is an oak of some type. Right here is a great easy comparison side by side of a softwood compared to a hardwood bark. On the left is a softwood bark. This is a loblolly pine. There's a ton of loblolly pines in this this tract here at the school grounds. On the right, that's a different oak. That is, if we'll look up here and see if it'll focus. There we go. Those are willow oak leaves. Willow oak. On the left here, this bark, well, I'll show you this one. So this is a loblolly pine, and it just kind of chunks off. You can actually buy pine bark as a mulch option. So you have to dig a couple inches in there to start hitting what we would use to make pulpwood. Pulpwood is made from softwoods. It grows very fast. That's in the pine family and some of the other like cedar families. And they grow much more quickly than your hardwoods, but they also aren't as dense. They're not as heavy and not as strong. So we tend to see pine trees either being made into pulpwood products like paper products and cardboard, or we see it being used for like 2x4s to use for construction lumber. Your hardwoods are going to be used for nicer, more durable products like specialty hardwood floors, furniture, cabinets, paneling, things of that nature. So what you see here is our very large mature long or loblollies. These are loblolly pines mixed in with some of the hardwoods I was just showing you. What I wanted you to know about these loblolly pines is they grow very quick as a commercial pulpwood option and saw timber option for landowners in this part of the United States. The native pine tree to this part, one of the natives, would be the longleaf pine, and it grows, has significantly longer needles than a loblolly, but they take a lot longer to mature. Now, longleafs will give you extra income if you were to raise them and manage them on your property if you have a lot of acreage, because you can then, after they get mature after a couple of years, excuse me, you can then harvest the pine needles, the litter underneath, as it drops each year, and you can use that for a mulch option in landscaping. But if you look right here at my hand, you can see that the pine, they come in these clusters, and they're gathered together in a little bundle here, and that's how you identify the difference between pine trees, one of the ways. So this one has 3 based on the length of them, and knowing where we are in the United States, that tells me real quick that we are probably looking at a loblolly, okay? Or I'll give you a really cool hint here. If you're looking at a white pine, W-H-I-T-E is how you spell white. There's 5 letters in the word white. A white pine you would find more in mountain regions, cooler climates. We don't have a lot in eastern North Carolina, but the telltale sign, W-H-I-T-E, count it on your hands. There's 5 letters. There are 5 needles per cluster. And if you look at it, stand back from the tree, it looks a little bit different too. It has more of a wagon wheel approach where the branches attach to the tree.